He took his lover to a 5-star hotel, but was stunned when I walked in and said, "Welcome to my hotel." He walked in like he owned the place. He didn't. He never did. Though for 13 years, he tried to convince everyone otherwise, especially me. I was watching from the security feed in my office on the 4th floor when Arturo Vega stepped through the revolving doors of Hotel Alvarado at 6:14 p.m. on a Thursday. He had his hand on the small of a woman's back, not my back. He was guiding her forward with that particular possessive energy I recognized from our early years, the era before I understood what it actually meant. She was young, 26, maybe 27, dark hair, glossy, freshly blown out. She wore a beige dress that cost around $800 and a handbag I would later confirm he'd purchased 2 weeks earlier on the Alvarado Group corporate card. She looked around the lobby with her mouth slightly open. The chandeliers, the fresh orchids, the silver letter A embossed above every elevator door, and her face was full of the kind of wonder that you can't manufacture. Arturo watched her be impressed. I recognized that look on his face too. It was the same expression he'd had when he first brought me to Paris, the first year we were married. He liked seeing people encounter things for the first time. It made him feel like a god. That morning, he had kissed my forehead at 7:45 a.m. and told me he was going to Monterrey for meetings with the Salinas Group. He said he'd be back Sunday. I handed him his coffee, the Oaxacan blend he liked, dark, no sugar, and said, "Safe travels." He didn't notice I wasn't sad. He hadn't noticed a lot of things about me in the past 6 weeks. My name is Mariana Alvarado de Vega, or it was, legally, until 11:03 that same morning, when I signed paperwork reverting to Alvarado. The A above every elevator? Mine. My grandfather's first, then my father's, now mine. The portrait in the main lobby, the large oil painting of a man in his 50s with kind eyes and paint-roughened hands, hanging opposite the entrance so that every guest saw it when they walked in. That was my father, Rodrigo Alvarado. He built this hotel in 1987 on a single bank loan, a borrowed truck, and an absolute, unshakable belief that every person who walked through his doors deserved to feel like they mattered. He used to say, "A guest is not a transaction. A guest is a memory we're responsible for making." He died of a heart attack 4 years ago. He never met Camilla. He never saw what Arturo became, or perhaps what Arturo always was, operating beneath a performance careful enough to fool everyone, including his own wife. Arturo walked past my father's portrait without blinking. He walked to the front desk, placed both hands on the marble counter the way he always did in spaces he was trying to dominate, and told the receptionist, a 24-year-old named Elena who had worked here for 8 months and had absolutely no idea what she was standing inside, that he needed the presidential suite. Full privacy, no disturbances, dinner reservation at the restaurant for 8 o'clock. Elena smiled professionally and processed his corporate card. The moment the charge cleared, my phone vibrated. It was Marco Sandoval, our head of operations, who had been with Hotel Alvarado for 11 years. His message was 5 words. "He's here. Presidential. Dinner at 8. I set my phone face down on the table in the boardroom where I was already sitting with Octavio Reyes, my family's attorney, and a manila folder so thick it required 2 rubber bands. "He checked in," I said. Octavio looked at me over the top of his glasses. He was 61 years old, with silver hair and the calm demeanor of a man who had spent 4 decades watching rich families destroy themselves. He'd known my father since law school. He'd watched me grow up in this hotel, doing homework behind the front desk, eating empanadas in the kitchen with the staff. "Then we proceed," he said. I nodded, and we went back to the documents. I want to explain how I got here, because this didn't happen overnight. Betrayal this comprehensive takes time to build, and time to discover. I married Arturo Vega 11 years ago. He was 38, I was 29. He had an MBA from ITAM, a sharp suit, and a way of listening to you that made you feel like the most important person in any room. He was also, and this matters, someone my father approved of. My father was not a man who approved of people easily. "He's got good hands," my father told me the night he met Arturo. It was his way of saying, "This one works. This one is real." I believed it. I had every reason to believe it. In the first 3 years of our marriage, Arturo was a genuine partner. He had real financial instincts. He brought structure to some of my father's less organized subsidiary holdings. He hired good people. He made the company money. When my father got sick, the first cardiac episode, the one that should have been the warning we all missed, Arturo stepped in seamlessly, taking on operational responsibility as naturally as if he'd been born to it. When my father died, I was in pieces. Arturo held them together, or so it seemed. It took me 2 more years to understand that he hadn't been holding pieces together. He'd been sorting through them, deciding which ones were valuable enough to keep. The first crack was small, so small I nearly missed it. 18 months ago, I was reviewing quarterly reports when I noticed a line item that didn't match the supplementary budget I'd approved. A service contract with an external firm called Vela Consultores, $340,000 for operational efficiency assessment. I didn't recognize the firm. I didn't remember signing off on it. I mentioned it to Arturo that evening, casually over dinner. He said, "That's from the restructuring round in March. I walked you through it." I told him I didn't remember. He gave me a patient, gentle look, the kind that said, "Of course you don't remember. You were barely holding it together after your father died," and changed the subject. I told myself I'd check the March minutes. I didn't. I should have. The second crack came 4 months later. I got a call from Diego Fuentes, who ran a real estate development firm we'd done minor business with, to offer condolences on the refinancing of the Coyoacan property. "What refinancing?" I said. A pause. "The collateral loan against the property. My My understanding was that it closed last quarter. My hands went cold. The Coyoacan property was not just an asset. It was the original Alvarado building, my grandfather's first commercial space. My father had specifically excluded it from any leverageable holdings in his estate documentation. It was supposed to be held in a protected trust. I got off the phone and pulled the trust documentation. Everything looked correct on the surface, until I looked at the signature on the loan authorization. Mariana Alvarado de Vega. My name, my signature. I was in Geneva when that document was dated. I had travel records, hotel receipts, passport stamps, and photographs from the Family Foundation event I'd attended. I sat in my home office for 47 minutes without moving. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I was raised by a man who believed composure was a form of respect for yourself, for the situation, for everyone watching. So when I finally stood up, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the table, and I thought about what it meant to forge your wife's signature on a document that violated her father's dying wishes. Then I called Octavio. What followed was 14 months of the most controlled, meticulous work I have ever done in my life. Octavio brought in Elena Bravo, a forensic accountant with 17 years of experience in commercial fraud and a reputation for finding patterns that everyone else missed. She was small, precise, with reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain and a habit of writing everything in red ink. I liked her immediately. Elena spent 3 months in the company records. What she found was not one act of fraud. It was a system. Vela Consultores, the firm I'd questioned over dinner 18 months earlier, was owned by Arturo's younger brother, Rodrigo Vega. Over 4 years, the Alvarado Group had paid Vela Consultores $2.3 million for services that Elena's analysis showed were either redundant, fictitious, or performed by Alvarado employees whose salaries were already being paid. The money moved from Alvarado accounts into Vela, then dispersed. 40% to Rodrigo, 60% to a personal account that, after 2 weeks of following the thread, came back to Arturo. 3 Alvarado properties had been used as collateral for personal loans Arturo took without board authorization. 2 of those loans were in arrears. The Coyoacan signature was not the only forged document. There were 6 more. And there was something else. Something that made the fraud almost secondary. Octavio received a recording. Anonymous tip, untraceable source, though I've spent some time since thinking about who it might have been, of Arturo at a private dinner 8 months ago, speaking to 2 of our major investment partners. On the recording, he described the Alvarado Group's management situation as complicated by sentimental obstacles at the ownership level. He said he'd been effectively running operations for years because the actual owner, his wife, was not equipped emotionally or analytically to manage institutional-scale assets. He said he was in the process of securing the company's future against its own heiress. He said it at a private dinner, in this hotel, at my family's annual gala, while I was standing in the room next door. I remember that night. I remember coming back from a conversation near the bar and finding Arturo in the corridor, looking slightly too relaxed when he saw me. He said he'd been networking. I nodded and asked if he wanted to find our table. That was the night I stopped grieving my father and started protecting his work. By the time Arturo checked into the presidential suite with Camila Rios, we were ready. The forensic report was 61 pages. The supporting exhibits were another 140. Octavio had coordinated with the bank's fraud division, which had received our examiner's report that morning and assigned a case number. Detective Armando Cruz from the Financial Crimes Division of the Fiscalia had been briefed 2 weeks earlier. He was, per our last conversation, reviewing the documentation and prepared to move within 72 hours of formal complaint. We had also quietly removed Arturo's executive signing authority from all active Alvarado accounts, a unilateral move I was legally entitled to make as majority owner, which we'd buried in a routine operational memo sent the previous Friday. He hadn't noticed yet. I had one more piece of preparation to handle before 8 p.m. I called Sergio Montoya, our head of guest relations, a man who had worked at Hotel Alvarado for 19 years and who had quietly kept me informed of the evening's developing situation. Sergio was 54, calm as marble, and personally loyal to my father's memory in a way that never needed to be stated aloud. When the dinner begins, I told him, give me 5 minutes, then handle the companion. Arrange a car, professional, private, tell her HR will be in touch Monday. I paused. She doesn't need to be in the room for what happens next. Understood, Sergio said. And Sergio, the staff doesn't know anything beyond what they need to. As far as anyone is concerned, I'm here for a routine ownership visit. Of course, senora. I hung up and looked at myself in the mirror in my office bathroom. Navy suit, my mother's ring, a simple emerald my father gave her on their 25th anniversary, which I'd started wearing after she passed. Black heels, no statement jewelry, no rehearsed speech. I had learned something over 14 months of documentation. When the evidence is overwhelming, you don't need dramatics. You just need to show up. The restaurant was quiet at 7:58 p.m. Soft piano. Rodrigo, our musician, doing a slow bossa nova arrangement near the window. White tablecloths, crystal that caught the candlelight. The low murmur of 12 other tables where people were having ordinary evenings, unaware. Table 7 was against the left wall, positioned so the occupant's back faced the entrance. Arturo always sat with his back to the room. He said it was because he disliked being observed while he ate. I'd always understood it was actually because he liked the power of making people come to him. I stood in the corridor corridor for a moment, watching through the glass panel in the door. He was mid-sentence. Animated, charming. Camilla was leaning slightly forward the way people do when they don't want to miss anything. The wine was already open. Something from our cellar, I noticed, which would mean he'd charged it to the company account. Then Camilla touched his arm. Not his hand, his arm near the elbow. A particular, comfortable gesture. Not a new couple's gesture. He turned, following her gaze. I was already 4 steps inside. The room didn't stop. The piano didn't stop. Rodrigo didn't even look up. Only Camilla and Arturo saw me enter, and the distance between recognition and reaction was, I counted it internally, because I had prepared myself, about 3 seconds. Camilla went white. She gripped the edge of the table. Arturo stood slowly, not startled, processing. I watched him run calculations behind his eyes, sorting exits, angles, narrative framings, damage control. The machine inside him, the part I'd once mistaken for intelligence, never really stopped. Mariana, his voice was careful, measured. Arturo, he tried a smile. Incredible, actually. The composure of it. What are you? I own this building, I said. My voice was conversational. I wasn't angry. I'd been angry 14 months ago, and alone with it. And it had been useful. It had kept me going on the nights when I wanted to stop. Now I was past it. I'm exactly where I should be. He stepped slightly to the left, creating an angle that put himself between me and Camilla and lowered his voice. This is not the place for whatever you think you're doing. I looked around the room. The linen, the crystal, the silver A on the wall above the bar, the photograph of my grandfather in the corridor I could see from where I stood. You brought your girlfriend to my hotel, I said. To the hotel my father built. On a corporate card that is no longer authorized to your name. As of 9 a.m. this morning. I met his eyes. This is exactly the place. Octavio appeared at my shoulder. I hadn't heard him come in, but I'd known he would. And placed the first folder beside Arturo's wine glass. Quietly. No drama. I opened it. I didn't raise my voice once. I went through it in the order Elena had organized it. The service contracts. The fraudulent invoices. The Vela Consultores payments. The collateral loans. I cited figures. I cited dates. I cited the case number that Detective Cruz had assigned to our complaint. Arturo stood motionless. A muscle in his jaw moved twice. That was all. Then Sergio appeared at Camilla's shoulder. He was impeccable. Soft voice. Absolute courtesy. Miss Rios, there's a car waiting at the side exit. Our HR director will be reaching out to you on Monday regarding your employment agreement with the group. He paused. I can hold your bag if you'd like to gather your things. She looked at Arturo with an expression that contained everything. Desperate, hoping, wanting him to say something, anything, that would make this not be what it was. He stared at the table. She picked up the handbag, the one he'd bought her with company money, and walked out. No scene, just the sound of her heels on the marble floor, fading toward the side exit, and then nothing. Arturo sat back down. When he looked at me, something had changed in his face. The machine was still running, but the performance layer, the charming, patient, reasonable man I'd married, had gone quiet. We handle this privately, he said, like adults. For 11 years, I was private, I said. I covered inconsistencies I should have questioned. I stayed quiet when people in meetings talked over me because you told me privately it wasn't worth the conflict. I filed the paperwork you put in front of me without reading it carefully enough because I trusted you, and because I was grieving, and because I believed the person who said he loved me wouldn't be stealing from my father's estate while I mourned him. I kept my voice flat, level, dry as paper. Today is the last day I protect you. I slid the second folder across the table. He opened it. The color left his face. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, like something draining. He was looking at a photocopy of the Coyoacan loan authorization, his signature, and beside it mine, the forgery. Beneath it, a sworn affidavit from 3 witnesses placing me in Geneva on the document's date, a notarized letter from the Swiss Foundation confirming my attendance, and, because Elena was extraordinarily thorough, a time-stamped photograph of me at the event itself, geotagged to within 200 meters of the venue, posted by the Foundation's social media team 8 hours before the document claimed I signed it. That authorized a loan against my father's Coyoacan property, I said. The bank's fraud division received Elena Bravo's examiner's report at 9:17 this morning. The signature has been referred for forensic verification. I watched him stare at the page. You forged my name on a criminal document, using my dead father's estate as collateral, to fund a personal loan that you are currently in default on by $480,000. He stared at the signature for a long time. When he finally looked up, the last layer of the performance had collapsed. Not with rage, not with tears, just gone. The architect of the whole construction, standing in the rubble of it, finally seeing it clearly. You planned every detail, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was almost admiration. Almost. You brought your girlfriend to my hotel, I said. Forged my name on a criminal document, told investors I was too emotional to run my own company, and moved $2.5 million through your brother's shell firm while I was burying my father. I picked up my bag. I planned accordingly. I placed the final item on the table, a small envelope, plain, unsealed. Open it when you're alone, I said. It contains a transcript and an audio file of the conversation you had with the Mendez and Castrojohn investment partners at last year's gala, in this building, while I was 20 feet away. I paused. The original recording has already been submitted to the legal file. That copy is for your own reference. I turned. I had planned this moment carefully, where I would stand, which direction I would walk, how much I would let myself feel. I had not planned for what came next. His voice hit me from behind, stripped of everything. No calculation, no performance, No patient, reasonable tone, just a voice. Mariana, there's something you don't know. I stopped. I heard my own heartbeat. Somewhere in the restaurant, Rodrigo was still playing piano, soft and oblivious. I stood with my back to him. There's something you don't know, he said again. About your father. About how the company really got through 2019. The 2019 cash crisis. The year before my father's death, when 3 of our properties had faced simultaneous debt pressure, and we'd come within 6 weeks of losing 2 of them. It had been resolved. My father had said it was a combination of restructuring and a private bridge loan from an old family friend. He'd seemed older after it, more tired, but he'd always attributed that to the stress. I stood very still. He called me, Arturo said. Rodrigo called me, not as your husband, as a financial operator. He said he needed someone who could move money fast without questions, and he didn't want you involved because you were already managing your mother's illness and he didn't want to burden you. I heard the shift in his chair. I moved $4.2 million through 3 channels in 11 days. It saved the Alvarado Group. And your father, when it was over, he looked me in the eye and said he owed me more than he could repay. My throat was tight. I used that, he said. What he said. I used it to justify what I did afterward. I told myself I'd already saved the company, that the money I was taking was owed to me, that I was more Alvarado than you were, in the ways that mattered. A pause. I know that's not true. I've known it for a long time. I stood there. I thought about my father, his rough hands, his voice, the way he'd looked at Arturo and said he's got good hands, whether he'd meant it as gratitude, whether those last 4 years of his life had contained something heavy he hadn't told me. I thought about the fact that what Arturo had just said was probably true, and also that it didn't change a single line of the 61-page forensic report. Those 2 things could coexist. I had learned that over 14 months, that someone can do one real thing and use it as a license for every false thing that follows. I turned around. Arturo was sitting at the table, the folders open in front of him, both hands flat on the white linen. He looked like a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just set it down. Did he ask you to do it quietly? I said. The 2019 bridge. A pause. Yes, because he didn't want me to worry. Yes. I nodded slowly. Then he would have paid you back. In time. In trust. In access. I looked at him. You chose to help yourself instead. He said nothing. I'll have Octavio verify the 2019 transactions, I said. If what you're describing is accurate, it will be noted in the legal file. It won't change the charges, but it will be noted. I held his gaze for one more moment. He believed you were good, I said. My father. He was not often wrong about people. I walked out. I did not cry until I reached the 4th floor. Not in the elevator. I held it there, pressed it flat, but the moment the door to my office closed, I sat in my father's old chair and I put my face in my hands and I let 14 months of controlled, documented, legally admissible grief out in one long, silent exhale. Not for Arturo, for my father, for the image of Rodrigo Alvarado, a man with rough hands and a borrowed truck and a belief that every guest deserved to feel like they mattered, calling his son-in-law in 2019 in a moment of crisis, trusting him, and the way that trust had been turned, incrementally, into a license. I sat there for 17 minutes. Then I washed my face, reapplied my lipstick, and went back to work. The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd expected. Detective Armando Cruz, Financial Crimes Division, 17 years on the force and 0 patience for institutional fraud, formally opened the investigation 5 days after the hotel dinner. He later told Octavio that our documentation was the cleanest, most organized fraud file he'd received in his career. Most of the time we spend 6 months finding what they already have, he said. This time we spent 6 months verifying it. The bank's fraud division confirmed the Coyoacan signature as a forgery within 3 weeks. The forensic handwriting analysis, conducted by Dr. Patricia Solis, a certified document examiner with the Universidad Nacional, was unambiguous. Rodrigo Vega, Arturo's brother, was contacted by investigators in month 2. He retained his own attorney and, within 10 days, provided a full account of the Vela Consultores arrangement in exchange for reduced exposure. I am not sure how I feel about that, even now. He wasn't a good person in this story, but he also wasn't the architect. The investment partners, the men Arturo had spoken to at the gala, were notified and provided the recording. The Mendez Group withdrew their advisory relationship with Arturo personally. The Castrillon Group, to their credit, reached out to me directly. We have since begun working on a legitimate recapitalization that my father would have recognized and respected. Arturo was formally charged with commercial fraud, forgery of private documents, and breach of fiduciary duty. The case is ongoing. His attorney entered a not guilty plea, which surprised no one, and the pre-trial phase is proceeding at the speed these things proceed. He has not contacted me personally since the restaurant. I don't expect he will. The 2019 information checked out. Octavio spent 2 months verifying it. Arturo had, in fact, moved $4. $2 million through 3 private channels in 11 days to stabilize the Alvarado Group's debt position. He had taken no formal compensation. He had executed it cleanly. It was real. I don't know what my father felt, accepting that help. I don't know whether he felt the debt that Arturo described, or whether he saw it as the act of a son-in-law who loved his daughter, or whether he suspected, in some back corridor of his mind, that the scales would one day tip in a direction he couldn't control. What I know is this. My father spent the last year of his life revisiting his estate documentation. He added protections I didn't fully understand at the time. The Coyoacan trust restrictions, a clause requiring dual signatures on any collateral collateral use of primary assets, a private letter to Octavio to be opened only if concerns arise regarding the company's administration after my death. We opened that letter. It was 3 paragraphs. It did not name Arturo. It described carefully the qualities of a trustworthy operator versus one who mistakes access for ownership. It said, Mariana will know what to do when the time comes. She has always been more like me than she realizes. I've read it 11 times. 6 months after the hotel dinner, I stood in my father's suite, his personal suite, on the 6th floor, which I'd kept locked since he died. And I looked at the view he used to look at, the city at evening, the lights coming on one by one. I had spent the previous weekend doing something I'd been putting off for 4 years, going through the boxes of his personal papers. Not the business files. Octavio had those. His personal papers, his journals, his letters. In one box, I found a photograph I'd never seen. My father and my grandfather, standing in front of the original Alvarado building in Coyoacan, the building Arturo had tried to use as collateral. My grandfather had his arm around my father's shoulders. They were both squinting against the sun, and my grandfather was laughing. On the back, in my grandfather's handwriting, the first day, we survived it. We'll survive the rest. I framed it. It hangs in the lobby now, beside my father's portrait. I still run the hotel. I still run the Alvarado Group. The restructuring is ongoing. 3 of the properties that Arturo's unauthorized loans had encumbered have been stabilized. 1 has been sold in a transaction that actually generated value for the first time in 4 years. Elena Bravo has become something like a permanent consultant. She arrives on Tuesdays with her red ink and her reading glasses and her absolute refusal to let anything unclear remain unclear. And I have come to understand this as a profound gift. Marco Sandoval got a raise. Sergio Montoya got a raise. Rodrigo the pianist got a raise, though he had no idea why. I filed the divorce paperwork on the same morning I submitted the formal fraud complaint. Octavio handled both. He said it was, from a strategic standpoint, cleaner that way. I said it was from a personal standpoint too. People ask me sometimes, friends, people in the industry who have heard pieces of the story, whether I'm angry, whether I feel like he took something from me that I can't get back. The honest answer is yes and no, and the distinction matters. He took time. He took a version of trust I won't have the same way again. He took the specific shape of grief I might have been allowed to feel about my father's death, which he had complicated before that death even happened. He did not take the hotel. He did not take the work. He did not take the portrait in the lobby, or my grandfather's photograph, or my father's letter. He did not take the fact that my father was right about me. The night of the gala, the night Arturo told investors I was too emotional to run my own company, I was 20 feet away, standing near the bar, holding a glass of sparkling water, talking to one of our long-term suppliers about a renovation project. I was running the company. I just wasn't announcing it. That last thing Arturo said to me before I walked out of the restaurant, you planned every detail. He meant it as a kind of accusation, a way of reframing my 14 months of documentation as coldness, as if the planning proved I hadn't really loved him or hadn't really been hurt. He was wrong. I planned every detail because that's what my father taught me. A guest is not a transaction. A guest is a memory we're responsible for making. I am responsible for this company's memory, for what it was and what it remains. I documented everything, and I was methodical, and I walked into that restaurant with my mother's ring and my father's name above the door, because the only way to honor what they built was to protect it with everything I had. He brought his girlfriend to my hotel. He forged my name on a criminal document in my father's building. He said I was too emotional to run my own company. He was wrong about all 3. The A above the elevator, still mine. And now, for the first time in 11 years, I know exactly what that means. I found out my husband had betrayed me with his